Hi, I'm Dave, and on this installment of Summit Racing Quick Flicks, we're going to talk about paint primers. Okay, so a couple of rules of thumb before we go any further on paint primers. First of all, primer is not going to cover up poor work on the front end when you do the body work. It's not a band-aid for poor work. Secondly, you're going to want to check with local laws, emissions laws, to see if you need to go with the low VOC or what have you before you go ahead and buy your paint primer. Okay, so two types of paint primer, or two categories. You've got 1K and 2K. 2K primers are the types of primers where you need an activator or some sort of catalyst to mix in to make it ready for application. 1K primers are basically rattle can primers, type you can just spray on. Everything's already in the can and it's ready to go on. For our purposes, we're going to focus strictly on 2K primers. Okay, so the three types of primers we're going to focus on today are etching primers, also called self-etching primers, epoxy primers, and high build primers. We'll start first with etching and epoxy primers. You're going to get the most debate about these two types of primers when you're out there on the forums or what have you. And you're going to get a bunch of different answers on when to use these. Both of these types of primers are for sealing metal to prevent corrosion. We really recommend the self-etching primers on new metal, untreated metal. It's great for collision repair shops because they're generally using new sheet metal. So you put etching primer on that type that's got chemicals and acids in it to actually adhere to the metal and create a barrier against moisture to prevent corrosion. The type of etching primer we carry, you can actually apply a top coat directly to it. On the other hand, epoxy primers, another type of primer used to seal metal, is great for restoration projects because you can apply it directly over the metal, but also body work, paint, and what have you. So if you got a little bit of a patchwork going on there, you've been working on your vehicle, epoxy primer is the way to go. You put a coat of that on there, and you can actually sand that down within a couple days, and then go ahead and put your filler primer over top of that. A couple other things about etching and epoxy primers. In addition to having corrosion resistance properties, they're also good for adhesion. You put those types of primers down and you can put your high build primer over that. Again, like I said, we have a self-etching primer here that you can apply a top coat directly to. Also, the epoxy primer offers very good chip resistance as well. It's another good benefit of using an epoxy primer. So again, to review, etch primers we recommend for bare, new metal. Epoxy primers we're looking at for restoration projects where you have a little bit of a patchwork with some filler, some bare metal, some areas where you sanded the paint down, all kind of mixed together. The third most common type of primer we're going to talk about is high build primer, or sometimes it's called 2K primer surfacer or primer filler. This type of primer is the type that you use to fill in imperfections on your vehicle, and it can go on over your etching primer or your epoxy primer once you have that corrosion resistant barrier underneath. Or you can just apply it directly to your vehicle. It just depends on what your project is and the condition of your vehicle. But the purpose of the high build primer is to fill in imperfections. You put a coat on and it's very sandable, there's minimal shrinkage on it. You put it on, you sand it, it may take several coats, you put another coat on, sand that until you've got a nice smooth surface. And once you do that, you're going to want to put a guide coat on. You can spray down a dark color followed by a light color, and you can kind of see where the high spots are at. And once you're happy with that, you can move on to your sealer if necessary. As you probably know, sealers are there to ensure a uniform color, a uniform substrate to work with so you have a nice smooth surface. Like we mentioned before, you may use one or a combination of these different types of primers. You may go with an epoxy or self-etching, probably not both, but then apply a high build over top of it. You might just go with a high build. It just depends on your project. However, we do have a few tips that we wanted to pass along depending on the type of primer you're working with. First, with the self-etching primer, biggest thing is don't use a metal cup for mixing or holding the primer, because once again the etching primers have acids and chemicals in them that react to the metal, and you're gonna have all kinds of problems with the tin can and everything. It's not a good scene, so avoid the metal cups and go with the plastic. As far as epoxy primers, the type of primer we use, you can sand after a few days, but if you're ready to go ahead and apply your primer to that, you're going to want to go ahead and give that a good scuffing up so that you have good adhesion for when you do apply that final sealer over top of it. As far as the high build primers, the 2K primers, primer fillers we've called it, it may take several coats of applying it and then going through the process of sanding it down and adding to it. But once you're ready to go ahead and put the sealer over top of that, you're going to want to go ahead and hit that with a 400 grit abrasive to scuff it up, get it ready. The other thing, or the other factor that you're going to want to consider, is the color of the sealer that you use, and it kind of depends on what type of top coat you're going for. If you're going to use a bright top coat, or you want to like a gold finish or something, you're going to want to use a brighter primer. If you're looking for like a dark, deep finish on your vehicle, you're going to want to use a darker primer. But really what it comes down to is testing. If you can get a test panel and just apply a little bit of paint on there and see how that comes out, that's just the best way to go. One other factor to consider is the temperature that you're going to be working in, and you're going to want to let our sales reps know what that is so they can give you the right hardeners and you get a nice even coat on your vehicle there. One other thing I should mention is tip sizes. As a rule of thumb, on the epoxies, 1.4 millimeter to 1.8 millimeter spray gun tips are the way to go. You can go down to a 1.4 to a 1.6 millimeter spray gun tip on your high build primers. If you want to get much higher than that, up into the 2 millimeter range, you're basically going to be spitting droplets of primer out on your vehicle, and you don't want that. Okay, so hopefully we've answered most of your questions about primer. If you've got more questions, feel free to leave one in the comment section below. Be sure also to hit our subscribe button over here to stay up to date with our latest quick flick videos, and be sure to watch other quick flick videos right over here.